All right, well, welcome to today's webinar, a 6-step protocol for engaging students in progress monitoring. Today's webinar is hosted by the Progress Center at the American Institute for Research, or AIR. We are an Office of Special Education Programs funded center aimed at promoting progress for students with disabilities. Now, my name is Tessie Rose Bailey, and I'm the director of the Progress Center. The center was actually developed in 2019 in response to the Andrew F. Supreme Court decision from 2017. And that case states that individualized education program, or the IEP, must be reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. Now, under IDEA, the IEP serves as the foundation for promoting progress for students with disabilities. So today's session provides a standardized approach for monitoring student progress towards annual IEP goals. It can also be used to support progress monitoring for students receiving supports through your Tier 2 or Tier 3 systems. Now, just a little bit about the center. To ensure free, appropriate public education, commonly referred to as FAPE, and improved outcomes for students with disabilities, the Progress Center supports local educators in both the development and the implementation of high-quality educational programming. We know that a well-designed program begins with an IEP that provides the supports and services necessary to promote progress towards ambitious annual goals. We also know, though, that for students to benefit, we have to ensure a high degree of fidelity to that program using evidence-based and high-leverage practices. Today's webinar is part of a larger series of trainings and resources that we have available to support local educators in implementing well-designed programs. Now, we'd like to start off today with a short poll, and we want to know a little bit about you. So take a moment and click on one of the boxes to let us know what's your current role that's led you to learn more about this particular service. And I can see the poll indicates we're talking about Statement of Special Education Services and Aids, but really we're talking about progress monitoring protocol for engaging students. So just select one of those. If the fourth one is you're not fitting into those first three buckets, just put in the chat box what your current role might be. You see some researchers, some graduation coaches. Higher education, hi Mitch. Got some RTI coordinators, great. So it looks like we have a lot of administrators on today's call and sort of an equal amount of special education and general educators. And so if you look in the chat, you'll see that we have all types of roles accessing today's information. A lot of folks who look like they'll take this and share it with their local educators. All right, thank you so much. So I'm excited to get us started today. We have two amazing presenters. Dr. Jenlyn Fury is an associate professor of school psychology at the graduate program at Rhode Island College. And then we have Dr. Susan Loftus-Patan, and she is an assistant professor at the School of School Psychology in the graduate program at Duquesne, make sure I say that right, University. Now, if I made any errors in pronunciations, they'll correct those for me when I pass it over. So join me in welcoming our presenters today.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm so happy you all joined us today to hear more about actively involving students in progress monitoring. So thank you very much. I'm going to start off by talking about our objectives for this webinar. So we're going to start off by kind of reviewing some of the research around progress monitoring and particularly involving students in that through providing performance feedback and engaging students in shared goal setting. Then we're going to introduce you to a 6-step progress monitoring routine that we created to help educators be able to provide this kind of feedback and work with their students in a way that is organized and simple to use, but includes a lot of good research-based components. Then we will talk about how you can evaluate outcomes if you do implement this routine at your school. And we'll talk about both academic outcomes and social emotional outcomes. And then we'll share some resources that could help you along if you are implementing this that you can take a look at moving forward. And here's the agenda for today, how we will kind of try to reach those objectives that we have. Most of the time is going to be spent on step 2 here, taking you through the protocol step by step, providing instructions on how you would implement it and giving you examples of what that would look like. And then after we're done with our presentation, we will be happy to take any questions you have. So as Tessie said, please put those questions in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. Okay, so first I want to just give a little bit of an overview of MTSS and progress monitoring. So many of you are probably very familiar with MTSS, but MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports, and it is a framework that focuses on prevention and intervention we're going to focus on the academic side of things, but it can also be applied to behavior and social emotional kinds of functioning. And we think about our progress monitoring protocol as a part of MTSS, as well as a way to support students who have IEPs and working toward their goals. So it really kind of serves both of those populations of students who are maybe at risk or struggling a little bit, and then those students who are already identified as having a disability and are working on IEP goals. So this visual here shows some of the main components of MTSS and how they work together. I'll start off briefly just by talking about screening, which we won't put a lot of emphasis on today, but that's a really important step in the MTSS framework where we're identifying those students who we're concerned about, who may not be meeting the benchmarks that we have set for them. And that helps us to put those students in line with services that will help them. So putting interventions in place that match up with their need. And the great thing about MTSS is that we don't just put students in interventions and hope for the best, see you at the end of the year kind of thing. We want to check in on them regularly to make sure whatever instruction or intervention they're receiving is actually benefiting them. And so that's where progress monitoring comes in. So progress monitoring is assessing students frequently, typically using curriculum-based measures or CBMs, so that we can make a determination of whether or not the intervention that they're receiving is working, or if we need to make any adjustments in intensity or adjustments in the content that they're receiving, so that we're using that database decision-making that is so crucial to MTSS. So we use CBMs because they are perfect for progress monitoring for several reasons. One is that they have a lot of research behind them. So we know these measures are reliable and valid for progress monitoring. They also are sensitive to change. And that's really important for progress monitoring because we're looking to see if students are making change over a relatively short period of time. And so we need these measures that will show us whether they're making improvements over a few weeks. They're also quick and easy to give, which is also important for progress monitoring because you're doing it so often that you don't want to be taking a ton of instructional time away from the students. So the way that progress monitoring typically works is a teacher maybe at the end of the week will take the student, give them the CBM, and then they will score the CBM, add the data point to the student's graph, and kind of put it away until next time. And usually they don't involve the students in that process by showing them, oh, here's the score that you received, and here's your graph, and this is what it means. That is not often a part of the typical progress monitoring process that we see happening in schools. And we think that there's really a lost opportunity there, that by including students in that process, there can be a lot of benefits. And this can be particularly beneficial for students with learning disabilities because students with learning disabilities are shown to have less self-efficacy than other students, meaning they have less of a belief in their own abilities. And they also tend to use a lot of peer comparisons. So they might be making really good progress individually on their own, but they see that they're maybe not reading as well as their friends in the classroom. And so they don't feel that they're getting better. So by showing them a graph where we're plotting their data points every week and can show them that they're increasing, it could have a lot of benefits. The last thing I want to mention about MTSS is just, of course, that emphasis on evidence-based practices, which is so important. And that's why on the next slide, I will talk a little bit about the research behind using performance feedback and goal setting. So there, as you can see on this page, I listed the citations for several different studies that have shown positive academic outcomes for reading, writing, and mathematics when using performance, feedback, and goal setting with students. And overall, the studies have found medium to large effect sizes when comparing using feedback and goal setting to typical practice where the student is not involved in that process at all. So feel free to take a look at some of these studies if you are really interested in this. It is very encouraging, and these studies span the age ranges from kind of kindergarten up into high school. So we have some good support for this type of practice. And we also see positive social emotional outcomes as well. So increases in self-efficacy and motivation for students who are taking part in the process of kind of self-evaluation and looking at their own data to make decisions and kind of talk about what that means for them. So that's a really nice outcome too, especially for the students with learning disabilities, as I had mentioned earlier. So we came up with this protocol because we saw the research that shows that this is a good practice that with good outcomes, but there really wasn't anything like practical to help teachers to implement this. So we decided to create something that we think is easy to use and is cost effective. So the materials, the forms are available for download and can just be printed out. It does not take a lot of resources. Really, the only resource is a little bit of extra time at the end of a typical progress monitoring session. As I mentioned, there's research behind using performance feedback and goal setting. And we also, I'll show you in a minute, all the components of our 6-step process have research support behind them as well. So we were really careful and know how important it is to be promoting things that have research behind them. And then we also worked really hard to make this as practitioner friendly as possible because we know if something is really complex or cumbersome, it is not likely to get used in the real world. So hopefully you'll agree with us that these are very practitioner friendly. Okay, so here are the 6 steps, and Jenlyn is going to go through each of these steps in great detail, but I just want to point out kind of some of the main components that we focused on to try to emphasize while using this protocol. So we're giving that explicit feedback. So telling the students exactly what they scored on a CBM, what that means. And then we're also, it's important to provide specific, true, and positive feedback. So finding something that's positive to share with the student to help with that motivation. So even if their score went down, there's something positive that can be said. And then we have the students participate in their own data graphing, and we look at the graphs with them so that they can see, okay, what does this mean? Did this go up? Did this go down? And then adding in a lot of reflective questioning. So what has been going well? What has been difficult? Those kinds of things. And then at the end, we set a goal for next time, and the students kind of think about whether or not they think they'll be able to meet that goal. So again, that self-reflection and evaluation. And we recommend using this protocol each time you monitor a student's progress. And that typically will be weekly or every other week. So now Jenlyn is going to go into more specific detail about the materials and each step of the 6-step process.
Great, thanks. So next I'm going to overview what this looks like, and hopefully, especially for those of you who are teachers and are looking to implement this as soon as possible, this will be helpful to guide your implementation. So firstly, the materials that you need include the typical progress monitoring materials that you might already be using. So the administration and scoring materials. Typically, we are looking at a curriculum-based measurement that is aligned with the skills that you're building in your intervention. So we're monitoring the same skills that we are targeting in our intervention, whether that's oral reading fluency or math computation. Another material that you'll need is a progress monitoring bar graph or line graph. So on the screen here, you can see an example of a line graph. And we also, you'd want to include or bring with you either a pencil, a marker. If you're working with younger students, small stickers can also be fun to mark their scores each week, because part of this procedure includes having the students be the ones to mark their score and progress. If you are using a data management system and using technology to graph your progress monitoring graphs, you can adapt this by making sure that you bring the laptop or computer or device where you enter your data and having that available during your progress monitoring session, so the student can be the one to enter their score and that they'll be able to see their graph on an Excel screen or Google Sheets or whatever it is that you're using. So in addition to your kind of business as usual progress monitoring materials, for this routine, you're going to also have a script with instructions. And there is a script for the very first session, the introductory session, which is shown on the far left here. And then you have a different script that you'll use for sessions 2 and up. So the script is going to tell you exactly what to do and exactly what to say to implement each step of this routine. And then the other material that you'll need is one copy of a note-taking log and fidelity checklist. So you can see that on the far right of your screen here. And the note-taking log, you're going to print one copy for each session. And that's why there's multiple of those showing on the screen here. So you're going to use these in combination, one script and one note-taking log for completing this instructional routine. As a resource to remind you of what materials are needed and some of the notes that I've mentioned, you can find this checklist through the Progress Center when you download the materials that were shared in the chat. So you can go through and make sure that you have everything you need before you get started. So I'm going to go through and explain and show you what is involved with each of these steps. I'm going to start with the introductory script. So this is the one that you're using just the very first session, and you're explaining to the student what is progress monitoring, and you're sort of orienting them to this additional routine that you're going to be doing with them. So for your introduction, you're going to say to the student, after you've completed the progress monitoring, what we just did is called progress monitoring. It helps us to know if you're improving in your skills in reading or writing or math. Each time we do progress monitoring, we get information that helps us to think about what to do to make sure you're learning. Do you have any questions so far? And at this point, the student might have questions. A common question that they might ask is this graded? And typically this is a formative assessment. It's not part of a grade. So we would tell the student, no, it's not graded. but it's really important that you put forth your best effort because it's going to give us information about how you're learning and what you might need. So after the introduction, you're going to start the routine. As Susan mentioned, the first step in the routine is to give explicit performance feedback. So immediately after you administer the progress monitoring, you'll say to the student, now I'm going to calculate your score by counting how many words you read. Or if you did a different type of CBM, you might say, I'm counting how many problems you solved, how many sounds you segmented. And then you're going to tell them their score. Your score is 35. At this point, you're going to record the score in the note-taking log. So throughout the instructions and scripts, you will see a prompt to record the response or to record information in the note log. Step 2 is you're going to provide specific, true, and positive feedback to the student on some aspect of their performance on that progress monitoring probe. So you're going to give feedback that is meaningful and specific, positive, and true. So you'll say, I liked that you, and then insert your specific feedback. So an example might be, I like that you use the decoding strategy that we've been practicing to sound out this word. Or I noticed that you use the new strategy that we're using to solve this math problem. A teacher is going to be in a really great position to give this specific feedback, because what we want to do is we want to tie it that we're seeing some qualitative evidence that the student is improving, and we're making a connection to the intervention in the skills that we're trying to build with the student. So even if in step 1, even if their score wasn't as high as we might have hoped it would be, step 2 ensures that this student is always going to get some type of a positive feedback that is specific and true, which is really important for supporting motivation. So that through a kind of self-determination theory, getting this feedback and ensuring that that's something that is said to the student each session, I noticed or I liked that you did this, helps to promote that feeling of competence. So steps 3 and 4 for the introductory session are going to be introducing the student to collaborative data graphing and collaborative data analysis. So in step 3, before you show the graph to the student, you're going to basically explain how the graph works. So there's a script that's built in here that you can use to just make sure that the student is understanding exactly how to read the graph. So you'll say to the student, every time we do progress monitoring, we will add your score to this graph. First, we find today's date here. Next, we find your score over here. And we mark your score on the graph here. So you're going to point to the place where the X and Y axis meet. This shows us that today your score was 35 or whatever the score was. In step 4, we're explaining a little bit more about how we're going to be analyzing the data. So in this very first session, we'll say to the student, the next time we do progress monitoring, we'll add your new score to this graph. The graph will tell us if your score went up, went down, or stayed the same. If your score goes up, it shows us that you're improving or getting better in your reading skills. So step 5 is in the introduction is a quick reflective question. So we're going to be asking the student in a supportive and non-evaluative tone, what have you been doing to improve your reading skills or writing or math skills? So you're going to listen to what the student responds and record that in your note-taking log. And this is starting the process of reflective questioning, which we expand upon that in subsequent sessions. But we're prompting the student to think about their academic behaviors inside and outside of school and what they've been doing to improve those skills. The final step is step 6. So in that last step, we engage the student in collaborative goal setting. So it starts by asking for feedback from the student to give the teacher feedback on how they can help the student improve. So you'll say to the student, I'm going to think about how I can help you keep improving. Do you have any ideas about what I can do to help you improve? So you'll listen and record your notes in the note-taking log. And this is prompting the student to think about if there's anything that the teacher can do differently that will help them to learn. So the student might say, no, I'm not sure, or they might have an idea. I really like it when you teach me this strategy, or I really like it when you let me choose from these activities. And so it just gives a moment to prompt and have the teacher show that they're taking accountability for the student's growth. And now the second part of this is we are encouraging the student to set their own goal. So we'll say to the student, let's set a goal that you can work on so that you keep improving. What can you do from now until next time so that you keep improving? The first time you do this, they might need some scaffolding to come up with some ideas. So you might give some sample goals, such as, well, you can, one of the things we're working on in our intervention is this list of sight words. So maybe your goal could be to practice those at home for this many minutes a night. Or, you can kind of think back to the goals of the intervention and what goals they might set for outside of the intervention time. So once you have a goal that you agree upon, you'll say to the student, good thinking. Your goal for this week or for the next 2 weeks is to practice reading for 10 minutes a night. Using this scale, tell me how sure you are that you can reach your goal. So now we have built into this a self-efficacy scale that ranges from 0, I cannot do it, to 10, I am sure that I can do it. So we're going to show the student this scale in the same scale as in the note-taking log. And we'll have them rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident they're feeling about reaching that goal. And the last statement that you'll give in this session is, with both of us working together, I know that you will continue to improve. So that concludes the very first session. The first session is going to take a little bit longer than the following sessions because you're doing a lot more explaining. The student may have some more questions. But the first session concludes with, I know that you will continue to improve. So for sessions 2 and up, the script is similar. There are some steps that are exactly the same, and there's a couple of steps that are a little bit different. So steps 1 and 2 are the same in the introductory script and the script for sessions 2 and up. You're going to start with that explicit performance feedback, telling them exactly what their score was. Then you're going to give them the specific true and positive feedback. So something that you notice that they improved upon in their performance. And then in steps 3 and 4, the script is a little bit different now. So now you've explained to them how to use the progress monitoring graph. So step 3 in sessions 2 and up, you're going to show them their graph, whether it's on the computer or it's a paper graph. And you'll say, together, let's add the new score to your progress graph. At this point, you'll prompt the student to be the person to actually add the score. They might need some scaffolding and reminders of how to use the graph. So we're going to find today's date, we're going to find your score, and we're going to find where these points meet. So you can point to where they're going to put the sticker or mark it with a marker. But the important part is that you want to have the student really take an active role in this. If you're using a computer, you can have the student type their score into the system. And in most systems, you can see the graph appear immediately, and you can kind of see the change from last time to this time. So that's step 3, is you're graphing the data together. Step 4 is collaborative data analysis. So you're going to say to the student, let's look at what the graph shows us. Did your score go up, go down, or stay the same since last time? So for the very first session, or for all sessions, you want to make sure that whatever they're responding is accurate. And if not, we can kind of review how to read the graph. And we can point to the previous data point and today's data point to kind of show that pattern. So you're going to record their response in that note-taking log. So then the next step is step 5. And it's similar in sessions 2 and up. Again, you're going to ask them in that supportive and non-evaluative tone, what have you been doing to help you keep improving? You're going to listen to their response. And this time, because it's the second time you've done this process with them, you're going to look back to your notes from last time that you did this and see what their previous goal was. You're going to compare the goal to their response and remind them of what their previous goal was. So last time you set a goal to read for 10 minutes every night. Do you think you accomplished this goal? And this is a time for the student to have some reflection on what's working, what's not working for them. This is a time for the teacher or the interventionist to be supportive of the student. And again, we want to ask these questions in a non-evaluative tone, but we're just gathering information to help the student think through what they might change in terms of their goal setting for future sessions. So you're going to record that in the note-taking log. And then you're ready for the final step, step 6. And this step is the same as it was in the very first session. So again, you're going to first model that you're thinking about how you can help the student improve. Asking the student, do you have any ideas about what I can do? Let's set a goal so that you can work. Let's set a goal you can work on so that you keep improving. What can you do from now until next time so that you keep improving? So they might set the same goal as last time to practice for this number of minutes every night, or they might have a different goal. And you can certainly give them sample goals to choose from if they're struggling to come up with a goal. Again, as the teacher or the person doing the intervention, you're really well positioned to help set a specific goal. So again, you're going to tell them good thinking, restate the goal, have them rate their self-efficacy, and again, end the session by saying, with both of us working together, I know that you will continue to improve. So I want to take a couple of minutes to take a closer look at that note-taking log that I referenced. Here is a screenshot, and again, you can find this from the Progress Center. So we have here a abbreviated version of the script. You want to still use the script, but there's sample pieces of the script here so that you can just know where to write in the responses. So we've got steps 1 through 6 listed with a checkbox next to each step. And this is where you're going to, again, print one copy for each session. You're going to record the score, record the responses. This is where all of the written information is going to go. And this is also really important to complete each time, because when we are implementing an intervention, we want to make sure that we've gone through and implemented it with fidelity. So by checking off each step at a time, that's helping you to ensure that you've not skipped a step or skipped over something, and that you're implementing it as it was intended. Just to give you just some other ideas about what this would look like when it's completed for a real student, we can see this example of a completed fidelity checklist and note-taking log for steps 1 through 4. So we see that in step 1, the student's score was 25 words correct in a minute. And the feedback that was given to the student on their performance was that I really liked that you used a decoding strategy to read the word glad. We can see that they completed step 3 and added that new score to the graph. And we can see that the score stayed the same this week compared to last week. And then for steps 5 and 6, here's some examples of what the student's goal may have been, or what they've been doing to keep improving. In this case, they were practicing reading for 10 minutes every night, or it could have been practicing math facts, whatever the goal was. Do you think you accomplished your goal? And the student's response. And then what ideas do you have about what I can do as the teacher to help you keep improving? Finally, they're going to set another goal for the next week or 2 weeks. What can you do from now until next time to keep improving? And in this case, the student set the same goal. It seems to be working well, so they're going to keep practicing for 10 minutes every night. And we see pretty strong self-efficacy in this case. And here's another example, just so you can see each time that you complete this routine, you're going to have a new fidelity checklist completed with the student's name and the date. So we want to make sure that when we're working with the student for the third or fourth session, we have previous fidelity logs and note-taking logs, because we're going to be referring back to these to say, last time you set this goal. So we want to make sure that we have that information organized so that we can be looking and reflecting on what goal was set and whether or not the student felt like it was an effective goal. And then I have one more example of a note-taking log and just some examples of what a student might say and what the teacher might say. So in this example, in step 2, you can see that the feedback the teacher gave in step 2 was, I really liked that you read this line like a question, great prosody. So you can give more qualitative feedback here. It doesn't have to be, you can just find something that is meaningful, specific, true, and positive related to their progress monitoring performance. And we're not really looking at the score, but we're looking at how they solved a problem, a strategy that they use, something specific. So lastly, if you are implementing this routine, there are a few different ways that you can evaluate outcomes for your student. One way is to look at whether or not this routine is helping to improve their academic outcomes. To do this, it's very straightforward to take the existing progress monitoring data that you're already using and compare the student's rate of improvement or progress before you put this routine into place and after. So we can look at the rate of improvement before, maybe it was 1 word per week, and after, maybe that rate of improvement increased to 2.5. So that's one way that we can do kind of a brief experimental analysis to look at whether or not this showed improvement for the student. There's a built-in self-efficacy scale right in step 6. So this is another way we can evaluate outcomes. We can even graph this self-efficacy over time, or just evaluate at the end of the intervention how strong their self-efficacy is for reaching their goals. And then the last area that we might look to evaluate outcomes is academic motivation. So there are many available options for this. I listed 3 here. One option, if you're working on reading, would be the self-regulation questionnaire in reading, which is aligned with kind of a self-determination perspective of motivation. The SMALSI, or the School Motivation and Learning Strategies Inventory, or the Student Mindset Survey Revise, focuses on kind of measuring growth mindset in the area of reading. So those are some evaluating outcomes options. So to kind of conclude, before we go into our questions, I just want to reiterate, we really hope that these materials, our goal is to get these materials in the hands of practitioners so that they can enhance what they're already doing in their progress monitoring with students. Progress monitoring is something that is done very frequently with students receiving special education services, students with learning disabilities, students who are receiving interventions as part of an MTSS intervention. And again, it's often something that is done to students. We want to take this time to supplement a brief, easy routine to actively involve students in this process so that they are, so we're being transparent with them, and we're giving more agency and self-determination when it comes to their academic outcomes. This is an efficient and effective way to improve these skills. And it really, when taken together, these practices align with a growth mindset approach, because we are really sharing with the student their progress. We have visual evidence that we're showing them that even if they don't see themselves as being maybe a strong reader or strong in math compared to their peers, we have visual evidence that you have improved from the last time to this time, or we can look at the graph over a longer period of time and see that you are making some big improvements. So we're really sending the message to students that abilities are improvable through both high quality instruction and their efforts. So that's the conclusion. We do have some resources here for those of you who might be interested in learning more about the research behind this routine. The last citation is a paper that Susan and I published in the journal Intervention in School and Clinic. And then there's also some resources on how to find this information from the Progress Center, information about the Center on MTSS, and the National Center on Intensive Intervention. So we can turn it over and check in on your questions now.
Yeah, and I just want to thank both of you for such an informative and engaging session. I have a lot of takeaways, and I'm going to share some of those really quickly. But we did receive a number of questions. I just want to let the folks know that our participants, you can submit a question at any time, and we will continue to ask those. If we don't get to all of them, we will, we will try to get to all of them, but just continue to connect with us if we don't answer the question you have. I would say the one thing that sort of struck out to me, we really as a center focus on the development and implementation of the IEP, and the data that you indicated in that evaluation outcome seems such a critical piece of the development of the present levels of academic and the functional performance. And I just wanted to share with folks that from my perspective, there's a lot of data that can enhance the development of that portion of your IEP, and then help you in making decisions around the supports and services that are necessary. I mean, what a blessing to have a student say to you, these are the things that I need, right? We're trying to co-create this IEP with families and students, and it's a great way to provide those data. I want to share, well, we have a bunch of questions that came, so I'll try to do them in the right order. We did have some questions around just how long does it take? What's the length of time? What should I maybe plan for if I was going to start this routine and then maintain the routine?
That's a really good question. So the first session will vary depending on how many student questions there are and how much scaffolding they need. But sessions 2 and on, about 3 to 4 minutes, that's in addition to your typical progress monitoring. So it is 3 or 4 minutes. It is some time. And I know that it's hard to find time during the day, but considering how powerful just a small change in your typical routine can be, in having that moment of connection with a student, and encouraging the feelings of competence, the feelings of autonomy, and really having that opportunity to give that positive feedback and to set goals is really valuable. And rather than doing a completely separate intervention that focuses on building self-determination skills or building motivation, we can just tag this on to something we're already doing, and it can be much more seamless and meaningful.
And I would say for those of you on the call today that are familiar with the taxonomy of intervention intensity that comes out of the National Center on Intensive Intervention, that 6th dimension is around behavioral support. And so we think about the design of interventions as embedding these types of features, that they're not seen as a separate portion. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So it wasn't really clear, I guess, for me, which grades would this be relevant for? Is it primarily for those lower grades, or can we use it across the grade spans?
Yeah, so in the research that we looked at, we saw studies done from kindergarten all the way through up into using it with high school students. So really anyone who is being progress monitored, this could potentially be valuable for. And even, some people may think like kindergarten, how would they be able to think about themselves in that way? But there have been studies to show that even kindergartners can kind of think about their own performance and start to build those kinds of self-determination skills as well. So really throughout all of the grades, it could be appropriate for.
Yeah, and I know through the MTSS Center, one of the things that is strongly promoted is the engagement of students in the design and delivery of their interventions. And so it seems like this piece of it really allows the interventionist or who's ever providing that the ability to have this authentic conversation around how do we ensure that what we're providing is relevant to you, both from their perspective, but also as seen on that progress monitoring data. And I'm wondering if there's any other special considerations thinking about that educators might consider for middle school and high school.
I think that what you said about that authentic connection and relationship, that's important across all grade levels. But I think because at high school level, middle school level, at the elementary level, you're with typically the same teacher. You kind of have a closer knit group of adults. And I think that just that piece of connection sometimes is not as prevalent at the middle and high school level because you're seeing so many different teachers throughout the day. And so having this carved out as a time for middle school level or high school level students who are being progress monitored because there's an academic need to get this regular feedback opportunity to just reflect honestly with a supportive adult and to hear the message of the adult that's built into the script, which is, how can I help you? What can I do? How can we work together to get you to where we're setting you up for your goal? So I think that as much as we do in education, we try to connect with all students. This is very helpful because it's something happening anyway, and it ensures that it's going to happen. And at the middle and high school level, sometimes we miss students in terms of those connections.
Yeah, and I think you all said something that really struck with me is we often do it to students. We progress monitor to students and not really engage them in the process. So we just received a question I think sort of aligns with this is, what happens when just the progress monitoring process itself feels really frustrating to the student? And how do you recommend reframing the process to sort of reduce those negative feelings about progress monitoring?
Well, I think that's why that second step of the process is so important, that we're really always focusing on something positive and something that really truly is good, and not just saying, not trying to be fake, like you did great, but saying like, here's something you've been working on and look at how you succeeded in that. And so talking about the data, so students will get frustrated if they're seeing that their graph is going down, if they're seeing that their graph is flatlining. But that's when you're having those conversations and being encouraging about, okay, what can we do? We're in this together. We're going to work together to figure out how to help you. And so it's not, you can't do this. It's, let's figure out what we can all do to help support you. So kind of changing that mindset, or trying to help change the mindset of a child who may have that low self-efficacy and has had a lot of experience with failure in this area, to flip it around and say, we can do this. Let's think of a plan and work toward it. And then hopefully, you can start seeing even small changes in the positive direction and then really start building on those.
Yeah, and I also think that maybe if we have a kid who has that sort of negative perception of it, is that we set very short-term feasible goals to focus on the process and building the relationship that you all are talking about before we get into, that more challenging aspects, right? I mean, it's almost like saying, well, let's step back and do something that seems feasible,
right,
before we really get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah, those are such,
go ahead.
I was just going to add, those are really great points, and kind of the student who's frustrated with the progress monitoring process. I would assume that, they're being progress monitored anyway, and that adding this to it could potentially, depending on the student, help to address some of that frustration so that they're not having to just practice this skill that's really difficult for them, but they're seeing that all of this work that they're putting into it is showing an improvement. And if it's not showing an improvement, then there's a conversation and there's intensifying intervention or giving more support. Potentially the instructional level is not right. And so depending on why the student is so frustrated with the process, to begin with, adding some of these connections into the typical progress monitoring procedure could be something that could be especially helpful for a student who's struggling.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that strikes me, and we hear this a lot from schools, is teachers sort of get to a point when a kid is not progressing. It's sort of that doing to but not with. They're seeing the data that the student's not progressing, and there's a concern about, well, why is that, right? And we kind of feel paralyzed in our ability to move forward. And it seems that this sort of process can help us develop that hypothesis that says why this kid may not be responding, whether it's an engagement issue or the kid finds it very difficult, or maybe it's not matching their needs. We're getting that immediate feedback so that we can change our behavior, and helping the student know that we're trying to help you and you're helping us help you, I think is so powerful. So, there was a question about who delivers this. I mean, is this something that has to be done by the classroom teacher? Can a paraeducator or student support, be able to do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So because of the aspect of providing that specific positive feedback, it really makes sense to us that the teacher or whoever's providing the intervention be the one who also does the progress monitoring and the protocol, because it would be much easier for that person to be able to notice, oh, you used the magic E to sound out there to read this word. And if it was someone else coming in and kind of just progress monitoring and doing the protocol, it would be much harder for them to really be able to kind of connect through the intervention to the assessment to the feedback. So we would recommend that whoever is providing the instruction or intervention is the one who also monitors the progress and provides the feedback.
Yeah, and I think that idea of that this is part of the intervention design and delivery as opposed to something outside can help facilitate that sort of idea that it's done by the same person.
Right.
So I do have two more questions, and I'll kind of combine them, and you guys can tackle them however. Is, we sort of talked a lot about this approach for students with learning disabilities, but I'm curious if it has application for kids, for example, who take the alternate assessment. And it also seems to me that it could be applicable to behavior. And I'm curious if you saw any research around its use in that domain.
That's a great question and consideration. So the scope of our research for our article was focused on students with learning disabilities and students maybe who don't have learning disabilities but have more significant academic needs. So that was what we reviewed, and when we were reporting the literature and the effectiveness, that's the group that was the demographic. However, I think that depending on the student and the needs, I agree that it could be a very effective, potentially with other students with different needs. But we want to make sure that we are using data or using an assessment that is sensitive to change, so that what we're showing them each time is something that is appropriate and based on whatever their goals are. And we can just use this framework as an opportunity, a structured opportunity to give that feedback and help students to engage in that reflection. Susan, did you have anything else to add about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I did not see anything in terms of behavior interventions and providing this kind of feedback. But that's an interesting idea. I mean, it logically makes sense that you could do a similar kind of, a similar kind of, feedback where we're looking at, well, what were your behavior goals and how, did we meet the goal for this week? But yeah, that would be interesting to kind of look into more.
Yeah. And I know there's some researchers on the call, so maybe that's something you can do. I know there are, programs like Check In and Check Out, they kind of have some of these elements, and that's probably where we're seeing some of those connections. Great. Well, I want to formally close this up today, but I want to start out by thanking you both for such an amazing discussion and for sharing the resources and your findings with the center itself. And so a lot of those resources are listed in the chat box, so you can get to those. I also want to thank you all for attending today. I know it's getting close to December, which is always the craziest part of the school year, but hopefully you found this very relevant to your work. If you do want to stay up to date and connected with us, we have a newsletter. You can access it from our homepage. There's a link in the chat box as well. But you can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook at K-12 Progress. In the chat box, you'll also see our colleague Zach, who has put the session feedback. So please take a moment to complete that. We use that data in looking at future resources and future webinars. And as always, we appreciate hearing your feedback. So just make sure that you stay connected with us and tell us what are your immediate needs and how we can best support you. Thanks everybody in the chat box. Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Dina. Hi, Sarah. Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone.